how did you find this material, Braden? How did it fall in your lap?
I gotta make up a better story for this, but it really comes down to reading Carter's book, you know, the beautiful book that Carter wrote, and finding, you know, I think it took me an afternoon or maybe 2 days total to read the book, but the sort of combination of elements of very strong sense of place and landscape, which I'm always drawn to, kind of a reasonably high horsepower narrative engine under the hood, but then the real thing that got me was the sort of complexity of the rendering of the characters, and this idea that came through right away, that no one's like all good or all bad, but they're all trying to sort of make it through with the toolbox they have.
Yeah, and they don't have a lot of options, right?
Well, it's almost like their horizon for what the possibilities are is a little limited.
Yeah.
You know, so the options might be there, but they can't see them yet.
It's funny you say horizon, because I thought you used the horizons so beautifully in the opening and the ending of the film. I wanted to ask you about that opening shot, which I just really knocked my socks off, no pun intended, but when it scanned across the environment and then wound up with the explosions. Can you tell me a little bit about coming up with that opening? Was it just your idea? Is it something from the book? Is it just a vision you had?
There's sort of a little bit of an ironic thing that was unintentional, but both of the feature films that I've made open with these wide vistas of mountains and a pan across them. It wasn't totally intentional to repeat it, but in this case, there was this idea of, I mean, it goes back to like why I felt like it was so important to shoot the film in the autumn and not like in the dead of winter when everything would be gray and dead and that kind of thing. And what it has to do with is this sort of, the whole story is kind of a story of like a disturbance within great beauty, or sort of spoiled Eden, or here's, you know, what there's almost not a frame in the film that doesn't include some element of like man's impact on the land. And so this, in a way, I kind of joke sometimes that the whole movie's like, I think that shot's about 2 minutes long, and it's sort of like the whole movie's in that shot. You start in kind of nature and Eden, and as you pan across, you start to hear some music and like the impact of, you know, trucks and some of the industrial work, and then you have the explosion, and it's sort of, you know, that's the structure of the movie. It's like you're sort of coming across, and then, you know, you still have 2 hours to go, but it's kind of all in there.
Is the explosion mining related or drug related?
Surface mining. Yeah.
You know, I was like, that could either be mining or a meth lab.
It's a little bit, it'd be a big meth lab.
Well, you know, it takes a lot for some people.
It'd be a big
So, Allison, have you spent much time in this part of the country, in Kentucky?
I haven't. I have actually spent time in Arkansas, but not as much in Kentucky.
Yeah.
So I do feel like I know the people a little bit, but I spent a lot of time with Braden and with the material, and definitely got to know it more that way.
Did you try and find anybody locally, or is pretty much everybody in the movie from out of?
No, a lot of the cast is local. I worked with a local casting director.
Oh, wow.
Erica Arval did, I think, an incredible job. And so I think there were a lot of really, hopefully you don't know who was.
That's always the
local
trick,
and
right?
who
Yeah.
wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think there were just a lot of really incredible faces and incredible people that kind of seamlessly went throughout.
It was nice to see Tess Harper again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's got such a beautiful energy. I hadn't seen her in anything in a while. Has she been working much, or?
Not that much. It actually just felt like a really wonderful person to put in here, and she was really game. I think she was pretty excited to do it, and she was there for a while, right?
She was there for a while.
Yeah.
Still really proud of it. We're gonna see her next week.
Yeah.
She's out in LA?
Yeah.
Because the film's going to LA next week.
Yeah.
Michael, you're fantastic in the movie, man. Absolutely fantastic. So many great moments. So, who came up with those shorts?
I mean, it's really less about the shorts and about the fact that my thunder white thighs needed their place on the screen. As short as they could go. Carissa?
I think you had a lot to do with that. I mean, Michael
Well,
came in
you know,
with a fully rendered idea of
it was a
Reese
collaboration.
was.
It was a collaboration, especially on how far to roll them up. I wanted to go a little bit farther.
Oh, really? Oh, jeez.
Yeah. See,
Oh.
it would have worked.
Well, then we could have seen the other tattoo. I like the fuck it tattoo, too.
I kind of wish, the other night I thought we should make those up as like merchandise, like little temporary tattoos we could pass out.
Yeah,
Say,
right.
Fuck it.
Yeah, exactly. But I really loved that last scene when you're in the clink there, and that shot on you was so beautiful. The way you composed it right through the little rectangle in the bars, and you, even though you had this tiny little frame to play in, said so much with so little, and it was just a really beautiful. Because with that relationship, you kind of wondering. Because it's odd how friendly they are, because it seems like he kind of, Philip's character, I'm forgetting, Cole, right? Yeah, it's like he's caught in this thing where he's like, if he could kind of, maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but if he could kind of forget about what he was doing and just convince himself that he was just a good Samaritan, and he's a nurse and he's helping people, and this is something that he doesn't really want to think about very much. And yet it seems like his best friend is the guy that he does it with. Like the guy, it seems like the guy he's most relaxed around and enjoys their company the most. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic. But Reese wants to get out. Reese wants to be done with it just as badly as Cole does, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we talked a lot about, which is a little bit of a tangent on the comment, is that Reese's house was, that relationship and that place was a place that Cole sort of felt the loosest. Where he felt like he could, figuratively let his hair down and kind of be himself. And there were a couple of thoughts I had during the last little set of comments, but like the other, I always saw Reese as almost like the Obi-Wan Kenobi in the movie. He was sort of like the sage for Cole, and the person that he went to for counsel and tried to, he was his therapist, he was his buddy, he was someone who helped him. Reese is probably the character in the movie who's most comfortable in his own skin. Right. And I think Cole and a lot of these other characters are learning how to be that way. And then, I did want to say about the shorts and stuff. There's an interesting thing where it's a good example of like listening to the actors. And what I mean by that is like Michael and Phil and this ensemble sort of came with, in a lot of cases, strong ideas about the identity of these people and who they were. And sometimes they're not always fully aligned with what my thoughts might be right out of the gate. But I've just learned over and over again that 98% of the time, and this goes for crew members too, but it's like they've thought about it even more than I have. And they're smart. That mind is like smarter than I can ever be on my own. And so if you sit back and just kind of let them bring it, some really cool stuff can happen. It certainly happened with Michael. Like everything he brought to that character was, astounding, starting from the ideas about how he looked and comported himself and his physical build, and trying to leave space for that to come out is so important, and not just cutting it off out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, and to that end, and I know that I want to ask the audience one last question, but I was fascinated by Terry, the actor who played Terry Rose, Cosmo. I think the audience might like to hear a little bit about him. Where's he from?
Sure. Cosmo's from London, England, and was someone who kind of came in from left field. Allison and I looked at.
Yeah, we saw maybe 100 guys for it,
Yeah.
at least at a certain point. I mean, it's a wonderful role, but I think there were a lot of actors who were interested in it. Cosmo just, he put himself on tape because he was in London, and it was just remarkable. It was just different and weird, and a completely different take that felt so natural and ingrained in, it was already a very lived-in person, in a way that I hadn't quite seen in an audition tape before, that I kind of immediately called Braden and said, like, I don't know what this is, but watch it. And, you know, let's talk about it, because he's just, there's something special. And he was in the middle of actually doing Peaky Blinders at the time, and so we had to figure out how to get him back and forth, and there was like stuff with his look, and get him back and forth to Harlan was,
Yeah.
it was
That's not an easy place to get there.
No, it was
we
about
had
3 hours from
that
the
and
airport.
getting Mark back,
Yeah.
was doing Black Mirror, so I mean it was.
Mark
Yeah,
left at
yes.
about 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning
Yeah.
the night we shot that brutal scene where Reese gets beat up, drove himself to the airport 3 or 4 hours away, got on a plane in Knoxville, flew to New York, got on a plane, went to South Africa,
Yeah.
and finished, and like
Black
started
Mirror.
shooting Black Mirror 36 hours later.
Yeah.
He looked like a really beefy Will Oldham. It was really weird. It was like Will Oldham.
I used to joke
steroids.
that. I sent Will some photos.
Yeah. One of the reasons I'm here tonight, by the way, authenticity barometer is that I'm actually from Kentucky. So when I saw that dude, I was like, wow, Cosmo. He pulled it off. It seemed very authentic, because you remember walking into one of these things, could be kind of like stick your fingers in your ears throughout the whole movie, but it was pretty.
He did
spot
this
on,
amazing thing where we had a dialect coach, but he had taught himself the dialect by watching, like, he was scanning like the internet and YouTube for home movies of like people, and the people had shot, and just like mimicking them like over and over and over again. And as Allison said, like, part of the trick with that character is, like, if you get just off track, the character's really tricky, because it's like he's sort of such a fuck up that it's like, if he's not super seductive at the same time, it's like,
Right.
Why is anybody hanging out with this guy? Why don't they just tell him to fuck off? And so we saw so many actors and tapes that were kind of in a good old boy vein that you'd seen before.
Right.
They were very good, but it just wasn't that thing. And then Cosmo's tape came in, and it was like, I don't know, this is like I've never seen anything like this. But, and I don't really understand what's going on, but he's got it. Like, he's gonna do the part for sure.
And it just felt like immediate without even knowing it. Like it just felt like him and Phil would have a connection with, because they both kind of have a similar way of approaching work.
Yeah. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Yes, sir.
I thought the movie was great. Awesome job casting, because he had so many characters. He had a cast where everyone, the actors all inhibited the characters, I thought, really well. What was your approach to kind of picking what stayed in the movie versus what kind of left on the cutting room floor? Because, there were so many characters. I don't know, I haven't read the source material,
Sure.
so I don't know what didn't make it in or something, but I was thinking of, was it the Lacey character?
Yeah.
She sort of was in there for a couple scenes, leading somewhere, and it didn't. And I guess it's showing that, drug dealing kind of ruins things in your life, I guess. But, it's sort of interesting you kept that in.
Sure.
How do you approach that?
There's a certain amount, and whether it's satisfying or not is a separate discussion, but there's a certain amount of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like narrative subversion going on in the movie. Like one of the, first of all, a lot of credit goes to Elizabeth Palmore, who did a beautiful job of adapting Carter's book, which is a much more expansive book even than what's here. And this is the movie's a sort of fairly extreme distillation of a much broader story in the book. So the dynamic you're talking about is much more expansive in the book, even in terms of where it goes. And then you know, that scene in a way where Cole shows up all bloodied and is like, hey, I need to talk to you, and you know, was one of the examples of the kinds of things that I loved about what Carter and Elizabeth were doing, where like in 7 or 8 out of 10 other movies, it would have been like, oh, what happened? Can I take care of you? You know, and she's like, no, I'm not having this. You're out. But in terms of the larger question you're asking, balancing all that, it took a lot of time. I think, again, Elizabeth did a great job on the screenplay, but then Joe Krings and I spent months trying to sort of balance out the flow of the film to make it feel musical and to try to have those strands sort of weave in and out of one another in the way that they did. Personally, it's like I'm very happy with the way it turned out, but it was not an easy feat, and I think there was this effort to try to like de-specify place and time. So it was like you didn't I wanted it to sort of flow like a record album or something. Like I wanted it to be like, well, did 2 days go by, or was this a month, or is it 3 weeks, or really that you didn't even think about that, but that it just sort of flowed a little more like memory or something. And it you know, the transitions in the film, all that stuff we worked on for a really, really long time.
Also, that Rockmore scene, I would have hated if that wasn't in there, because that said so much, not only about Cole and Lacey, but about where they were and about the whole sociological situation that they were in. And, you know, and to see that hope, like that's such a beautiful thing when she's like leaning into him and he's trying to decide whether, I mean, that scene's just gorgeous. And for me, it's like, that's enough. Like, I don't need more of that. Like, there was so much information in that about the whole deal, you know.
Well, and there was also an idea kind of about the undefined relationships that I think arguably we all find ourselves in at times. You know, like I think a lot of times in movies, it's like all one thing or all the other thing, and I think leaving space for like, what is this? Are we friends? Is this gonna turn into something else? Like, what's happening? You know, sort of, all of that was a big thematic of the film. I mean, this quote that we took a couple lines from the Jason Molina song, Farewell Transmission, right at the end of the credits, you know, that the real truth about it is no one gets it right. The real truth about it is we're all supposed to try. And to me, that was like the compass of the movie.
Anyone else? Yeah.
What's the time? What are we?
Very short answer to this last
Okay, well, there's
We got like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Well, until the next movie
No, I
starts.
know.
but we-
Oh, right.
Okay.
Well, how about you and then you? All right, you too.
Michael, you answered my question. I was wondering if you were particularly interested in this movie because you were born in Lexington, Kentucky, not Thornton, right?
Oh, yeah.
But your birthday's coming up this week.
Saturday, yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's very beautiful. Thank you very much. I appreciate
I love
it.
the movie. It
Isn't
was
it nice?
wonderful. You had me crying though.
That's all right.
I was just gonna ask about, the cinematography was so beautiful. Could you talk about working with Declan Quinn on the tone of the film?
Declan was just what a
So
dream.
beautiful.
You know, I think we were very fortunate on this film to have a really experienced crew. Debbie DeVille has been working a long time. She, you know, all the way back to like Ulysses Gold, and before that, Declan obviously worked with Jonathan Demme for years. You know, shot Leaving Las Vegas. I mean, the guy is. You're sort of dealing with cinema history when you deal with him, and to be able to have that collaboration was amazing. You know, I want to also give credit to the second unit cinematographer, Adam McDade, who just nailed a lot of the landscape shots that you see throughout the film, and a lot of those were based on my own location scout photos and stuff like that. But, you know, a huge part of what I like to try to do is allow all of you and the viewer to kind of live in the same world as the characters, and part of that has to do with not always having a one-to-one ratio between the frame and the story. So like you want it to diverge and have these little moments of breath from time to time where you can kind of wander around the world too. And I just think those guys did such a great job of allowing you to kind of smell the earth and the place. And we certainly treated the landscape like another member of the ensemble. It wasn't, it was never just like, oh, let's shoot in this place. It was like, well, what story is this frame telling? You're talking about the mining scene and the fact that they're having this beautiful moment in this place that's been sort of ravaged, was super meaningful to the story. It goes back to the story I was telling about the opening of the film.
That's it. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Braden, Allison, Michael. Thanks for being here. All right, good night.